program is all about. I understand it's called foodophilia. Anybody actually know what that means? Or you've been following the program? Okay, so I'm going to just have a quick roundup of what it is. Foodophilia is a new program curated by the Arts House, which seeks to explore more about food through the arts. And this year, Foodophilia will focus on the relationship between food and our national identity. Singapore is a nation of immigrants, we do know that, and a multicultural cultures. So the recipes for many of our favorite dishes travel with our forefathers from their native lands. So we can really claim their dish that they bring along with them. Are they actually from there or from somewhere else, or is it ours? So this panel that we have today will explore how we can define what it means to be Singaporean through our food. So that's the topic for today. And without further ado, I would like to welcome our panelists. Today we have Dr. Niki Karuivish. She's an author of Eating Curries and Kueh. Is it like Kueh Tiao? Yeah. A cultural history of food in Singapore. And she holds an appointment in Asian Studies in the School of Humanities and the University of Tasmania. Her new book is called Food Fright, and she'll probably tell you more about that later. Over the other end, we have Alfian Saad. He's the resident playwright of Wild Rice. He has been nominated for the Live Theatre Awards for Best Original Script 7 times and has received the award twice. Alfian was the winner at the Golden Point Award for Poetry and the National Arts Council Singapore Young Artist Award for Literature in 2001. His new play, Cook a Pot of Curry, will be staged by Wild Rice very soon, sometime in July, next week, 3rd and 20th of July. So you can imagine he's a very, very busy man. And next to me, we have Wong Hung An. He's currently a director of sales for Singtel Digital Media. Hung An loves to eat, like all of us, right? And has written more than 1,500 dining experiences on F&B establishments. That's quite a lot. Yeah, and more coming. Too much? Over the last 3 years. So he currently appears live on air every Wednesday on local radio station 938 Live and on a foodie lunch break segment, and has been a restaurant judge for the Singapore Business Review. Okay, that's a quick roundup and introduction of our panelists. My name is Rita Zahara. I'm an author, I'm an entrepreneur, I write cookbooks, I have my own masterclasses and a variety of things that I do. But it's not about me today, it's about the panelists, and let's start the ball rolling. Okay? Perhaps we can start with Doctor. You would like to tell us a little bit more about your current project and then we delve right straight into the topic.
Thanks very much, Rita. So I've just finished a book, the title of which Rita mentioned, which is coming out in December this year, which is really a cultural history of food in Singapore. So I'm a historian by training, and I've had a long interest in food from the perspective of gluttony rather than scholarship, and it took me a little while to bring those two things together, so it's been a very fun project, and I'm excited to see that out at the end of the year.
Perhaps Alfian can also give us an up-to-date about your play that's coming up next week.
Yeah, we're rehearsing it right now, and it's called Cook a Pot of Curry, basically based on an incident 2 years ago. I don't know how many of you have heard of this incident, but basically there was a community mediation center, and one of the reports that they had, one of the cases they had to deal with was a family from China who had moved into a housing estate in Singapore, and they had moved, and the neighbors were Indian. The Indian neighbors cook curry, and the neighbors from China actually complained about the smell, and they had to have community mediation. And the resolution that they had was that the Indian family would still be able to cook curry, but only on the days where the China neighbors were not in. And I think quite a few Singaporeans were quite upset by what they thought was an overly accommodationist attitude by the mediators to new immigrants.
How many of you were familiar or are familiar with that story? I think it really went online and viral for a bit, right?
There was a bit of a campaign as well. So I think one of the things we can address today is how I think food can be politicized. Ownership, cultural ownership of food, etc.
Actually, I think that's a very interesting incident, but perhaps one of the most interesting things about it is that the media controversy was not at the time of the mediation, but when it was reported as being a successful mediation and publicity, so that what it really shows is how in a very small amount of time actually views about immigration have shifted.
One last one before we actually go into the topic. Maybe, Huan, you would like to say what you're currently doing right now?
Okay, I ask myself that when I wake up every morning, like, what am I doing with my life? But no, right now I'm doing a lot of things on the Hungry OS side. We manage about 400 restaurants for online reservation, and we do marketing. We advise marketing for about more than 50 different F&B groups. And I'm sort of a one-man show, so I sort of manage a lot of that. But the more exciting thing is that we're bringing in Gordon Ramsay, and we think that will be a very interesting thing. And we're going to have Gordon Ramsay cook out against our top local hawkers, and he's going to do his version of our local food. And we're going to have a competition to see who. We're going to have a public vote to see who we think will win out. We're going to have an expert. Yeah. So I'm really excited about that. So because curious to see. I'm sure curious to see his personal cooking skills and his interpretation of what local food is.
Thank you, panelists. Okay, the agenda for today, what we're going to do is going to make it really dynamic, very fluid, very relaxed, not so formal. So I'm just going to ask some questions, and then any one of you can just pick the questions. And then towards the end of the session, maybe about after 45 minutes of our conversations, and then we'll open the floor for any questions that you may have. Okay? How about that? So the very first question I'd like to ask the panelists. There has been talk about Singaporeans being very synonymous with food. If, let's say, you were to talk about Singapore, we always think of Singapore as a food haven. How true do you think that stigma is about us? Alfian.
I'm not sure. Did you say stigma?
Is it a stigma, or is it a good thing, or is it a bad thing?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, for starters. But at the same time also, I think this elevation of food as a kind of symbol or metaphor for our identity, I suppose it's because there is very little common culture at this particular point of time in Singapore's history. So I think when you look at certain foods and you look at the kinds of hybridity that has happened, like for example, something like mee goreng, right? Which is like you have Chinese noodles, but then you cook it with Indian spices, for example, you create, in a sense, a completely new dish. I think that is the idea of a kind of melting pot that maybe we don't have in Singapore society. I think you mentioned something about melting pot identity in Singapore, but actually what we have in Singapore is not melting pot identity, but a multicultural, multiracial identity. And the other food metaphor that they mobilize for this is a salad bowl identity, right? That basically you have all these ingredients inside, but they don't come together. They make something new, but in a sense they also retain their own distinctiveness. You retain your so-called discrete, let's say, Chinese, Malay, or Indian identity. At the same time, you're part of this Singaporean salad. Yeah. So I think what's interesting for me is when we have all these sort of like hybrid foods, that have developed historically, and as a result of context between cultures, I think those are the things that you see as the idea of a Singaporean, and maybe a melting pot Singaporean. Yeah. So I think Peranakan food is perhaps another instance of that, Malay cuisine and the Chinese cuisine coming together.
So do you see us as one uniform identity when it comes to food, or do we really can segregate our community, like Peranakan, Eurasian, Malay, Chinese and Indian, and each of the communities have their own identities in relation to food? Or is there one uniform Singapore identity?
I think it's both. I think what's interesting is that it's both. Sometimes, like for example, when I look at people talking about a Singapore national dish, yeah, you can still sort of like segment it according to all the different ethnic streams. And of course, in Singapore, of course, some communities will have their own dietary prescriptions. So if I'm Muslim, I can't completely participate in you know, what it means to consume certain kinds of Singaporean food. Yeah. So when they say something like I don't know, pakwa or something like that as an example of, you know, Singapore food. So obviously some communities will not be able to relate or identify those things. So I think there are those aspects, which is okay, each community has its own food. But I think there's also that other aspect, which is that over time, I think some Singaporean fusion / hybrid cuisine has also developed.
So, in the eyes of the world, if you want to define a Singaporean dish, is there any such thing at all? Doctor?
Let's be the expert.
Yeah. I think as the foreigner here, I might be the eyes of the world. Yeah. I think that there isn't one dish, and that desire to make food just about one thing is maybe part of the problem, because actually part of the pleasure of what we might call Singaporean cuisine is the fact that there's an implied diversity in it, that there's more than one dish. So, you know, I can think of the things that I like best, that I come back for and I look forward to as soon as I get off the plane. But I think that when we think about it as a cuisine, it's much more than dishes. You know, food, a cuisine is not just about individual dishes, but an attitude to food and the way in which food is consumed.
So that makes Singapore and Singaporeans really very exciting bunch of people, because when you look at Singapore, or let's say we look at England, for example, you think of fish and chips, right? Perhaps, yeah? But when you look at Singapore, you think chili crab, and then there's mee goreng, there's rojak, there's so many different dishes. Hung An, in your experience and talking about food and all that, what would be the most favorite dish that people always talk about in relation to defining Singapore and Singaporeans?
Yeah, actually we did a survey, and interestingly, it seems that and once again it's hard to say, but it seems that the chicken rice seems to be one of the most popular associated dish in Singapore. And even though they call it the Hainanese chicken rice, the reality is that a lot of it has changed, and it's closer. Most of the cooks today are actually Cantonese, and they've infused their own cooking into it. So I'm Hainanese, right? But when I go back to Hainan, which I've been back once, they tell me, oh, you guys Singaporeans are like all wrong, right? All wrong. And so I said, okay, well, I will try what you tell me is the Hainanese chicken rice, because I'm here from Hainan, right? So they should know. And they give me something that's really rock hard, because first of all, they use a castrated rooster, which is really tough to eat. And it's hard to eat. It's overboiled. The rice has no flavor. It tastes like ginger and rice. And it's a terrible dish. It would never sell in Singapore, you know. So in a sense, that is, even though we call it the Hainanese chicken rice, it's over time, different cultural groups has influenced it in such a way as to what it is in Singapore today. So I would rename it Singapore chicken rice, actually, rather than the Hainanese chicken rice.
So interestingly, beyond the topic of chicken rice, who created the chicken rice? The Chinese, the Malay has their own version of chicken rice where it's more fried, and then the Hainanese version is more steamed perhaps, and then there's so many different versions. And that's the same thing with quite a few of our dishes, because let's say mee siam, you know, or mee rebus, even the Chinese are selling nasi lemak now. So when we talk about certain foods, or laksa for example, who can we say that it originates from? Which ethnic group? In your writings, in your research, what do you feel about those kind of statements?
Yeah, so first of all I'm going to ask a question, which is, why do we want to know the origin of the dish? What are we asking when we're asking that question? Because, you know, I'm a historian, you would think, yeah, she's really going to care about what's the first instance of something. But I think that question about the origin kind of misleads us. When we say that, we're saying, who owns this dish? And, you know, clearly chicken rice is a Singaporean dish, right? we don't need to know where it came from to know that it's Singaporean, because it's ubiquitous here, it's consumed here with such pleasure. For me, that's enough to say that it's Singaporean.
Okay.
I always find that also a very interesting question, because I think these kinds of protestations don't just happen among the communities in Singapore, but of course across national borders. So because of our shared history with Malaysia, I think I'm very familiar with some of these debates, right? So when sort of maybe even chicken rice makes it to some kind of global list of Singapore food, some Malaysians start making noise and like, oh, chicken rice is actually Malaysian, so because of our shared history. So, but I would try to answer that question, what kinds of interests are at stake when people start claiming themselves as being the originators of certain kind of food. I think at times there is an element of cultural chauvinism, cultural superiority involved in those kinds of claims. Like for example, between the Chinese and the Italians, right, who first came up with noodles or pasta or whatever, right? So I think those things will be there, and I think sometimes it's a question about ego, and as I mentioned, chauvinism. But there are times also when I feel there are political dimensions to these things. Yeah? And one of those things that I have encountered is, let's say, when Peranakan cuisine and Malay cuisine, they make certain claims over who first originated some of that food. Again, I think it's asking a wrong question about who originated those things. But at the same time, I also feel that the Peranakan culture itself is sort of being reshaped and redefined in both Malaysia and Singapore. In Singapore, one notices gradual, say, Sinicization of Peranakan culture. And that's evident in certain things like when you see Little Nyonya on television, she's speaking, they are all speaking Mandarin, for example, whereas the more accurate language would be Baba Malay. So when these things happen, then I think there are some concerns by people about, okay, are you trying to de-emphasize, say, the Malay influences in Peranakan culture, And what does that attitude convey? Is it that because Chinese culture is superior to Malay culture, therefore Peranakan culture has to have Chineseness as its dominant marker, rather than all these other sort of like Malay aspects and contouring to the culture? So I think it's an interesting question. It can lead us down a certain chauvinistic path, but at the same time also it's also a question of like who's in power in society, who has all that power to define what a certain culture is.
So in a way, it's not important to really know the origin of that particular dish, but rather to associate yourself to what kind or what version of that particular dish you like. Let's say the Chinese chicken rice and the Malay chicken rice, and then you make a preference and then you go with it, and yet you respect the other version. Would that be a comfortable statement to say?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could answer like where is the origin of this dish come from, but the reality is that if you ask 5 different people, you might get 5 different answers, and the truth is nobody really knows. But I mean, like what Alfian was saying, a lot of it stems down to pride. I'll give an example. Like recently, one of the chefs from Marina Bay Sands, Autism, right? He's one of the founding chefs from Italy and the US, came down. And their first time to Singapore. So after they fed me, they were like, okay, now you bring me and show me what local food is, right? And so I thought, okay, at 10 p.m. where can I go? I didn't want to go to Newton, right? Those tourist hotspots. So I brought him to Old Airport Road because I figured that has a whole list of things that you can try. And I ordered a different set of dishes. And then he ate the chi kueh, the chi kueh with the salted vegetables. And after he ate it, I still remember he looked at me and said, I've eaten this before. So I was like, wow, but it's your first time to Singapore. When you eat it, it's like, this dish definitely came from Italy. And I started boiling, That was it. That was it. I said, you can claim the noodle. To claim the chi kueh is an offense. You've just committed a national offense right there, And I was like, no, that definitely didn't come from northern Italy. Alright, But so then I asked myself, why did I react in the way I reacted, to this to this celebrity chef, and it's because I'm proud of my food. I'm proud of the heritage that we have, and that's why, you know, when it came down to saying, yeah, you know, the chickpea definitely originated from this part of the world, I was very quick to defend that. But you know, sometimes it's very difficult to tell because, I mean, foods can generate from different parts of the world at the same time, and you really never know unless you know. Sometimes people have create food and they don't document it. If you document it, fine. You know, you have certain dates to prove it. Like, you know, the chili crab, they started going down to the first newspaper article when it was first written and stuff like that. But it's really hard to really say when it really comes from. But I like what you know. I'll give an anecdote on how I would relate to origination. So I had an ex-colleague, and she is a Singaporean, but she has like 6 different blood groups. So from like Dutch to her dad is like half Goan, half Indian. Mom is Chinese and a Dutch mix. So when she said when she had to fill out the race thing, you know, she has like 7 items to fill out, right? So she just put Singaporean, right? So that's what it is. You know, over time, the thing is that I think for us, we just embrace it as it's a Singaporean creation. A lot of the dishes that were created, you know, many years ago may not even be the same as what it is today. You know, but it is, whatever we have today is created to fit our palate, and that's something we can be proud of.
So that's about multiculturalism and embracing it. And how do you think it affects us as food consumers? Meaning, like for example, I'm Malay, but I have restrictions on my diet. I have to eat halal food, for example. But do I appreciate my neighbor's food? And then that goes down to the story of your cook with a pot of curry, that whole story about that saga. So we can politicize food in a way. I think that is one story where it's really it goes down to politics. There's a relationship between politics and food. So I may want to ask Alfian now, in relation to writing your particular play, how do you actually inject elements of politics into this food story?
I'm the kind of writer who thinks that everything is political. So I don't. It doesn't need an injection at all. You know, it needs an injection of something else to maybe make it less political or something. But yeah, you know, and for me, food in Singapore is really quite political. And when you hear someone from like Lee Kuan Yew, for example, the kinds of metaphors that he uses, certain things where he talks about, let's say, for him the idea of integration is, or non-integration, is Malays not wanting to eat the same food as you know, other communities in Singapore, that's one. And then when he talks about what he thinks is the persistence of primordial or tribal sentiments in Singapore, he said, okay, if you're a Malay woman and then you have a fine last grain of rice, you know, will you share it with your Chinese neighbor, or will you share it with your? So again, you know, it's about food. So yeah, my play uses that as a kind of launching point. But I do think, yes, food is very political in Singapore because it's very much a reflection of our diversity and how we negotiate all our differences.
I think food is always political, and it's political everywhere. But part of the lure of food is that we assume it's not political. We think because we eat every day that there's nothing that comes with it, but in every context food is political. I think whether that's you know, you care about the food miles, or whether that's about sustainability, or whether that's about, you know, religion or identity, there's always a lot of politics. But I think one of the things about food is, you know, we're much more willing to cross boundaries about food than we are other things. So, you know, people will say, you know, they wouldn't marry somebody from another culture, they wouldn't sleep out, but they would eat out, right? And so it's much more permissible to engage in that rule breaking or that culture shift around food than it is around other kinds of interactions.
Yeah, I sleep out and I eat out, so but you know, definitely, I mean, I think they're doing very well, so I'm pretty nothing much to add to that.
Okay, so we have kind of identified the different races, the basic ones, like Malays, Eurasian, Chinese, Indians, and Peranakans. But what about the other new races, our new friends that come into the country, and then creating new kinds of food and introducing new kinds of food to our palate? For example, now you can even have Vietnamese halal food, and then halal, all sorts of food, right? And then that is one aspect. Making international food into halal. And at the same time, because of our new friends in the country, we have a fusion of their new food or their own introduction of the food. What do you think about that kind of development in our food history?
As a consumer of food, I think it's fantastic. You know, from the perspective of gluttony, what could be better than a fantastic variety? And, you know, if we think about what that means for Singapore, actually this is an old story, right? I mean, the history of Singapore relies on migration, on the movement of people and ideas and goods. You know, Singapore has globalisation at its very inception. So this is a really familiar story, and I think, you know, for me it's an exciting one.
But does it not water down our national identity? Now, like, let's say the eyes of the world again. We identify Singapore, okay, chicken rice. You have a cookbook and then you have chicken rice on the cover. But now with the multi-faceted, so many different languages and races in Singapore, if you were to write about Singapore food, what could be that picture then now? Because it's going to be so many other food. And having just 5 races is not enough because we are more than that. So that how does it affect our national identity and our culture then, and appreciation of food?
I think our national identity and culture is always changing. The reality is that food that was, first of all, Singapore was just a fishing village, right? So we're only a 35-year-old country, to be honest, which is very small compared to many countries around us, very young, I mean. And the food is always evolving. Like I was just talking about Hainanese chicken rice, which is no longer really Hainanese chicken rice. It evolves over time. It evolves to what people are willing to eat and what people like to eat. And so I think there's nothing wrong with that. It will keep evolving. You know, who knows, maybe in 50 years' time, the Hainanese chicken rice might taste totally different because of the different set of people that we have here. And, you know, and who's to say that's right or wrong? So, you know, I think it's asking, will that change our culture and stuff? I think it's not the right question for me because I feel that we are a set of immigrants to begin with anyway, and the food that we have here is unique to Singapore, and it will continue to be unique to Singapore depending on the mix of people that we have.
So should there be a concerted effort to preserve what we have, or we just let it evolve and then let's see what happens?
That I wanted to say there. One is, you know, it's not just the people that change, but it's the ingredients. You know, anybody who cooks knows that when you make something on one day and you make it the next day, they don't taste exactly the same because ingredients aren't identical. And if we think in 30 years, the very things that we cook with will not be exactly the same. So we can't fix the past. You know, it's not like we can take a postcard moment and have things always be like that taste moment. So I think even if we want to hold on to something, actually we can't. So, you know, we can think about ways of saving some of that knowledge, but we can never, you know, we can't stand still.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, and we cannot control the evolution, but one of the things that sort of saddens me a little bit is that our local food is becoming very commercialized. And so I'll give you an example, right? So these days, a lot of the fishball noodles stalls, they do not want to make their own fishball because it's painful, they don't want to wake up 5 a.m. and do this, so they just buy off the factory. The factory delivers at about 6:30, and so you get all this, and of course the factory will find the cheapest possible ingredients to minimize costs and stuff like that. So you get a very, I find a lower grade quality sort of hawker food, and this is very prevalent in the food courts, whereby, you know, to cut costs, they hire a lot of the, Chinese workers who have never cooked local food before. And they are given a recipe, right? Okay, put this noodles in for 10 seconds, you will then add this fish ball in, and it will come out, and we'll all have the same thing. And sometimes it just doesn't come out right, and they have no incentive to try to fine-tune it to make it better, because, look, I'm just paid $6 an hour, I'm just going to do this job, this is what I'm paid to do. You told me to put it for 2 minutes, I'll get it from the factory, I'll put it for 2 minutes, and it's unfortunate that because of commercial reasons, our food is evolving into a factory-like production, mass-produced, which is not the same as, whereby in the olden days when it evolved, because people put their heart and soul into it to try to make it really good.
So you're losing its authenticity. Alfian, what do you think?
I do agree that what globalization has done is to basically make the entire world your supermarket in terms of, your ingredients. You basically can get any kind of food, in Singapore, because it's at the center of all these trading routes, etc. But at the same time also, I do think, I'm not insisting on a kind of picture of environmental determinism. I'm not saying that, just because you live in a certain place, then you have to have that kind of food. But I do think that in terms of, say, the staple foods that we have, I think those would still form the kind of base of a national dish. I don't see, let's say, noodle-based or rice-based dishes in Singapore being displaced by maize-based or cassava-based or, potato-based kind of foods. I don't think those foods will become Singapore's national food. If there is going to be some kind of evolutionary shift, I think the staples might not change that much, and we might sort of accept other kinds of Asian or even Southeast Asian kind of dishes as part of the cultural canon, national canon of foods. But I don't think it would drift very far from our sense of the region and locally available sort of ingredients.
I wanted to go back to that idea of commercialism, because actually, Singaporean consumers are very discerning and fussy, right? You go to a stall and you don't think that your fish balls are up to it, then you don't go back there. So actually, it's in the hands of the consumers how demanding, and I think Singaporeans are pretty demanding, and I mean that as a compliment. So that is part of what makes the food continue to be good, because there is a standard that has to be met.
Food staples may not change, but perhaps the way they are presented. So for example, in the past, maybe we will eat put the rice on banana leaves, but now we have plates that look like banana leaves, but they are not the original banana leaves, right? So perhaps the staples will not change. So part of the tradition is retained in terms of the food, but the way it's presented is different. So do you see that going forward, going to be more of such changes along the way, that they try to retain a little bit of the past and then try to adapt to what's in the present to make it very mass-produced, easy, people are working and no time for all these traditions and stuff. So do you think that could be?
Not necessarily. I think that change is inevitable, so we will see change, but I don't think that necessarily means mass-produced. I think those are two really different things, and that in many places in the world, what we're seeing actually at a moment is people, certain elite groups, caring very much about food that's not mass-produced. The entire movement of localism, of eating locally. And Singapore's very interesting there, because the 100-mile diet, eating only those things from 100 miles from your location, actually means something very different here than it does, if you live in a small city in the US. So, Singapore both challenges those kinds of ideas about local food and offers some new possibilities.
You've been a judge on a business review and on your own food show on radio. What would be your take on the standard of Singapore food today?
Oh, I'm very happy with the standard of Singapore food actually, and the reason is because we get a lot of variety. You can pretty much find a lot of things here. I remember about 7 years ago when I was living in Washington DC, it hit me. It hit me more than 12 years ago, and it hit me because you could find like pretty much like a huge slew of variety of food. I mean, they had one restaurant just selling very niche Nigerian food or Senegal cuisine, you know, which I really enjoyed, you know, just trying, and that kind of variety really stood out to me. I was like, wow. At that point of time, at tourism, I was like, wow, I wish Singapore was like that, you know, where I could try things from different parts of the world in just one city. And I think we are almost there, you know, with the amount of different restaurants that have come in here. You know, I won't be surprised if even the Michelin guide will pick Singapore as the next destination, because there's just so much variety and very good quality. It's like, you know, there was being mentioned just now, Singaporeans are very picky eaters. I know because, you know, when I started Hungry Go Where, it became a complaint site. You know, everyone say, it's not a food review site, you know, it's a complaint site. But I said, what can I do? Singaporeans love to complain, right? You know, we complain about everything under the sun. So, you know, that's the way it is, and it will ensure that well, it will hopefully ensure that food will continue to maintain at a certain standard. Although the risk of once again commercialization, I believe, comes in because it will come to the point, you know, whereby, you know, the question is, I still want to pay $3 for my food, you know, and if it's not that good, I'm like, oh yeah. Some people, the bulk will say just bopian lines. What to do? I want to pay $3, right? I don't want the guy to personally make every morning and pay $5-6 for my food. So those that are willing to pay, you know, hopefully there will be a few of your higher quality hawkers that would stay behind and be willing to keep the tradition alive. But you know, if you talk to any of the hawkers today, their children, no man, they don't want to do this. I still remember one kid, you know, because one of the things I do is I actually mentor IT company startups and stuff like that. And this kid one day walked into my office and he was like pitching his idea on a payment gateway system, and I was like giving him feedback and stuff like that. So out of the blue, I asked him, so what do you, I mean, what's your background? He said, oh, my dad's a hawker. And I said, oh, where does he work? And he said, oh, he is the guy behind Hill Street Char Kway Teow. He's Mr. Ng. I was like, what? That guy's a legend. I was like, why the hell are you building a payment IT gateway system? I mean, I'm struggling with like 30 different companies. Like, get the damn recipe and start cooking, right? You know, and that would be a huge business. Like, yeah, but I don't know, wake up at 5 a.m. and sell Char Kway Teow for $2.50 and stuff like that, you know. So you know, that was a waking moment. I realized, yeah, you know, over time, it's unfortunate we may lose some hawkers along the way and things will become mass produced, but hopefully there will still be a few that will pass the tradition on. And hopefully there will be enough Singaporeans that are willing to pay to allow this tradition to be passed on.
Talking about hawker food, you mentioned about Gordon Ramsay going to do something like that, a cookout. Maybe you can explore and explain a little bit more about that. And how do you think it can change, or there's a shift in paradigm or shift in mindsets in the people, and the younger generation becomes more, you know, interested in passing on or taking on this role and be a hawker, perhaps?
Yeah, actually, to be honest, there is a new breed of generation of young hawkers that are coming out. They are just disenchanted with what they're doing, and they just want to run their own show, you know, and start up a little store and stuff like that. So there are recently, there's been a recent movement on that whereby quite a lot of young hawkers are trying their hand at it, you know, which is why I remember when I was doing a TV segment about a year back, and with KFC touring, you said, you know, we need a hawker school, because these guys, they go to cooking school and they learn French food, Italian food, and they learn how to cook pasta, but they don't know how to fry a fried rice, you know, with wok hei, you know, that kind of thing. So that's something that's lacking, is that educational process to keep hawker food alive, you know, because it's seen as being low end.
Hawker food equals Singapore food?
And low end. You know, everybody wants to be Gordon Ramsay, but nobody wants to be Mr. You know, frying Char Kway Teow, you know, that kind of thing. So it's unfortunate that is the way, but I wish there was more, you know, culinary cooking schools that focus on our local fare, rather than just teaching you how to fry or cook a bouillabaisse, you know. I mean, that you can get off the internet, really. But, you know, it's unfortunate that's the case.
Yeah, look, I think that conflation of hawker food as national food, I understand why that happens. But actually, if we think about, what we might call the foodscape of Singapore, that the whole kind of the landscape of food of Singapore, it's that, but it's not just that. And I think those, hawker food is very important, but it's not the only thing that makes up the cuisine of Singapore. And it's also the stuff that you cook at home. And I know lots of people, don't cook as much as they did, but I actually think home cooking is part of where national food takes place. But it's also the place you go to celebrate a special occasion. Those are the things that make our memories of food as well.
Yeah. When I first heard about the Gordon Ramsay challenge, of course, now hearing from you, I get the point about, okay, maybe some kind of glamour by association, kind of, you do want to elevate the hawkering perhaps, or something hopefully a bit more respectable than the kind of rap that it's been receiving. But at the same time also, sometimes when I first heard about it, I was wondering about this idea of, is it about requiring validation from outside of Singapore for our food? Do we require some kind of external assessor for how good food? Because I really do think that part of national pride also rests in the kind of food that doesn't travel and cannot be appreciated, by the rest of the world. I think we have a little bit of that, like durian, for example, or the smell of belacan, for example, And I think a lot of Singaporeans are themselves quite offended when they go overseas and something is marketed as like Singapore noodles, for example, and it's something really horrible, to them. And then for them, it's like, oh, then we shouldn't trust the foreign talent to decide for us what's good or what's not good. So.
Yeah, I definitely think you shouldn't trust the foreign palate, because, not to say anything against my own, of course, but because what is good is what you enjoy, right? I mean, that is the definition, and it doesn't need foreign validation for it to be important. But also, I'm not so sure that if you stop somebody in the street, that they care about that. I think they care really what's it like when they're there, at 7 p.m. on Thursday and they're hungry. That's the real validation, I think.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes more before I think I'm just about to open the floor and ask anyone for questions to the panelists. Maybe any last words from our panelists before we wrap the session and I ask them to ask you questions.
Last words. I'm only 35, so last words is not a good thing for me at this moment in life. But it's very interesting. I enjoy looking at the foodscape. Been doing this for 7 years. I still love to eat most of the time. Unless it's a job hazard, sometimes you repeat over and over again, not so fun. But generally, I like to look for new things, and I'm always very fascinated by the change in culture, or if someone comes up with an interesting rendition of our food. And I'm very proud of hawker culture. And one of the things that I must be honest that when we thought about bringing Gordon Ramsay in, I really didn't think so deep into that level. When you just brought, like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. I just did it because I wanted to have fun. That was the bottom line. And have fun and that was that. Really that was it. And and continue to build our brand name, of course. So that was all that was in my mind, or was in our mind that when we planned something like that. And I expect it to be. I hope that I expect our food to continue to evolve, to change, and definitely have no issues with that. And it'll be interesting to 20 years time when I look back and I see what it used to be and what it is today.
I guess my last words about Singaporean food. Well, I don't really want any last words actually, because for me, having the chance to write and think about the food of Singapore has been an enormously pleasurable journey. And it's one I'm very interested in continuing, because I think there's going to be lots of evolution as there has been in the past. I plan to have my fork and spoon at the ready.
Yeah, I don't really have any last words, but in response to what you said just now, I suppose my point is that yes, the Gordon Ramsay publicity is good, but also I think there's a sort of inbuilt defense you have in case he doesn't like Singapore's hawker food, which is that you've got foreign taste buds, man. You don't understand. You can understand why we like this food. So yeah, so it's win-win, If he likes it, it's good. If he doesn't like it, there's already a ready explanation.
Yeah, we're prepared for both sides.